Okay, we're back,
This is Professor Cutler,
and this is Dane Paschal.
and we're going to talk to you a little bit about tort law. You've already talked to us a little bit. Thanks for the conversation today. Really enjoyed it. But
Yeah.
anyway, back to torts. Tort law really, you want to know, can you get some money because you're injured? How were you hurt? That's the first thing you need to ask. Okay, was it an intentional act that the defendant committed, or was it an unintentional act? If it was an intentional act, it's going to be a lot easier for you to recover. Intentional torts fall in the areas of assault, battery, false imprisonment, intentional infliction of emotional harm. That's intentional torts to people. To your property, you've got trespass of property, trespass of land, trespass of chattels, all those sort of things. You can take a look in your book about that. It's very pretty much set. But sometimes it's tricky to figure out whether it's an intentional tort or an accident. For example, cats on a hot tin roof, you're throwing something off the roof and it lands on a car. Is that an intentional tort or is that an accident? In other words, you didn't go to the edge of the roof and
Right.
throw the rock trying to hit the car. You just sort of launched it off and didn't know what was going to happen. Well, I think it depends. Did you know that there were lots of cars in the parking lot, or did you not know that there were any cars in the parking lot? If you knew there were a lot of cars, then it is with substantial certainty that your act will lead to some sort of injury or harm to someone's property. So, but was it intentional? Was it accidental? Most of the time that we're going to spend in most of the questions on the test are about unintentional torts.
Right.
Unintentional torts, then, I'm going to divide into two very broad areas as well. First of all, the theory of negligence, and this is the predominant theory,
Hmm.
and then the concept of strict liability, which is the narrow, very small exception to the big rule of negligence. Now, we could have a system where if I do the act and I hurt your property or injure you, then you would recover. That is not the system we have. We have a system where the burden of proof is on the plaintiff to demonstrate that I, the defendant, acted in an unreasonable fashion, i.e., I am negligent.
Right.
So that's what we have to look through. So your basic concept that you've maybe heard that, okay, you're at the light and someone runs into you from behind, they're always liable, not true. They're only liable if they are at fault. Most cases when someone runs into you from behind, they are at fault, but they're not liable just because they ran into you from behind. They're liable if they ran into you from behind and if they are at fault, i.e., their brakes were working fine until they got to this intersection and they put them on and out of nowhere they didn't work. The defendant's not liable because they're not at fault. So we want to ask if people acted reasonably. If they didn't act reasonably, that's our first thing we got to prove in a negligence case. And Professor Cutler will tell you about the other things, that the prima facie things, the four things that plaintiffs have to prove in order to win their case.
Right. And so that's certainly one of them. Whether or not they acted reasonably means that they had a duty to act reasonable given the circumstances, and that changes from situation to situation and fact pattern to fact pattern. So it becomes important for you to learn how to do that analysis. What does acting reasonable look like? What does it mean given this fact pattern? And then the other prima facie element is whether or not there was a breach of duty. Did they do what they should have done, or did they fail to do what they should have done? That then means that there was a breach. And of course, then the other two are causation, and causation is a big piece when we talk about negligence. Causation, of course, means that we're looking at, but for the defendant's action, this injury or this harm would not have occurred. So that's just part one of causation. Then part two of the causation is, do we have a foreseeable plaintiff? Do we have a person that the defendant should have reasonably been able to anticipate that by his or her negligent behavior, this person would have been injured? Is that plaintiff within the zone of danger? So, if so, then that person is a foreseeable plaintiff. And there's no cookie cutter in terms of you have to be 5 feet away, 10 feet away. Zone of danger is determined case by case.
Yes, and the case you should have read, I'm sure you're very familiar with, and you can talk to anyone who's ever gone to law school. Tell them you read Hallscraft versus Long Island Railroad, and they'll say, wow, very complex, very interesting case. You know what happened. I'm the conductor on the Long Island Railroad train. I'm helping, here, hand, I'm helping the passenger or potential passenger get on the train when it's moving. I'm not supposed to be doing that. The rules say don't help passengers on trains once it's moved. But I do that, and he has a suitcase, and the suitcase drops, and there is an explosion, and people are injured. The question is, what injured people can recover? The answer is, can the people that were right behind him recover? Yes. Why? Because certainly when I helped him on in an negligent fashion, I should be able to anticipate that those people right behind him would be injured. What about the person 30 yards away, down there? She was injured too when a light fell out of the train station from the ceiling and fell on top of her. Can she recover? We've got to ask. She was clearly injured, and but for my negligent behavior of helping on the train, she never would have been injured. But is that enough? And the answer is that isn't enough. The question is, when I was helping on the train, could I foresee or anticipate that that person way over there would have been hurt? I don't think so. The answer is no. So Ms. Palsgraf, innocent, waiting for the next train, will not recover from the conductor, and through the conductor get the employer, i.e. Long Island Railroad.
Right. So one facet of causation is proven, and that's the but-for causation.
Yeah.
But the foreseeable plaintiff and what we call proximate cause, she's not proximate, not near enough, can anticipate that she's going to be hurt. That doesn't.
So clearly, what this prong does, the second requirement of proximate cause, is it limits my liability. I'm liable to the people I could foresee that could be injured, but not to anyone else. So people here recover, people way down there don't recover. We'd like to put that on the test in some sort of way.
Yeah, and let's talk about the railroad company now as well, under the theory of
responding superior.
Yes.
Now, of course, if you are any of the injured plaintiffs, I don't have a lot of money. I'm a conductor. You want to get Long Island Railroad. They're big time. How do you get them? How is it possible to get Long Island Railroad? And the answer is not just because Long Island Railroad is the employer. The idea is that you must prove that the employee, when they did this act, was acting within the scope of their employment. What that means, were they acting for the benefit of the train company when they were doing this? And yeah, clearly they were. So, but that's a requirement. You've got to go through the employee. You've got to prove the employee was negligent. That's the key thing.
Right.
Go through the employee to get to the employer through the concept of respondent superior. Ask yourself, was the employee acting within the scope of their employment? Now, here's a little trick. Sometimes that's hard to figure out. Ask yourself, if the employee was negligent, most likely, 99% of the cases, then the employer is going to be liable. If the employee did something intentionally, in other words, this guy was coming up on the train, I didn't like him, I just slugged him, okay? Would my employer be liable? No.
Most likely not.
No. In other words, this is an intentional tort. Outside of what I'm supposed to be doing, the only person who will be able to sue me is me for an intentional tort, but you won't be able to go through me to get to the employer because I'm not acting within the scope of my employment. Okay, other things. What else do we talk about in negligence?
Well, we also want to remind the students, always take a look at the plaintiff's behavior.
Yes, that's very
important. Always take a look at the plaintiff's behavior.
Okay, so once you have proved what you need to do, the plaintiff can prove that, but the defendant always has a comeback. The defendant can always say, well, plaintiff, I might be negligent, but your own negligent behavior contributed to this accident. And